Hello, and welcome to the first Chivalry Ask Me Anything. We invited members of the community to jump on here and ask the panel any questions they want answers to, whether it be fighting, politics, garb, strategic, anything. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Tonight's panel consists of Master Torvald, Master Richard, Sir Mohammed, Sir Jabril, Sir Shaichel, Sir Hassan, Sir Valgard, and Sir Anton. And I'm your happy little moderator. So I hope you guys enjoy. We are most likely going to do this again in the future, so think of those questions you want. We're going to join them in progress now.
Oh, there's a question.
Hey-o. Hey. Hit me with it, Larissa.
This is Lissa, by the way.
Sorry.
I just couldn't change my name. So I'm going to voice it instead of write it because it's a little confusing. But so I'm a fencer. I'm noticing in the fencing community that a lot of people are doing the historical martial arts, even some of our mods. The entry I've seen in the martial arts area from Heavy has been in the tournament aspect, the sort of pageantry, but I've never really seen a lot with weapons forms. I know there are some earlier manuals with long swords and shields and things like that. Is that something that's able to be explored in the game that you do, in the fight that you do, or is that kind of strictly a fencing thing?
So I just want to make sure I understand the question. You're just asking if it's possible in Heavy to practice period techniques, manual techniques, and stuff like that right out of history and use them effectively in our sport. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone want to jump on that?
I'll jump on that.
Alrighty.
Almost no. Almost entirely no, because of the way our sport was set up. We have very little record for Age of Mail and no armored manuals for how to do it. We have no record of people dying to a single blow, right? In any kind of actual, in any kind of eyewitness account, and we die to a single blow in what we do, and none of the manuals were well known in 1966. So everything that they did was being made up as they went along, and they made up this game that is not at all accurate as far as a historical recreation of sword combat in 11th century armor, which is, we're supposed to be wearing 11th century armor. There's no manuals for the 11th century. Those were all 14th and 15th century. We got no clue, right? So the quick answer is no. Now, Cerise of Harlech just sent me a paper about sword and shield combat from period sources, and it's all conjecture, right? And that's kind of where we're at. I think. Anybody want to contradict me?
Anyone else want to jump on that?
Well, there is scope within SCA fighting to experiment with HEMA techniques. As Valgard says, we don't have any manuals for 11th or 12th century combat in Mail, but there's nothing stopping people from working with the longsword material from the manuals, including using rules variations such as only counting thrusts to the face or to certain other areas such as the armpit that were vulnerable. Obviously, grappling and blows to the hands and lower legs and so forth are illegal under the standard SCA rule set, but certainly people can do backyard practice stuff that's not officially SCA sanctioned. And within the SCA rule set, again, you can modify what kinds of blows or thrusts you accept. The East already allows half sorting. So in regard to the, while it's true that we don't have a basis for recreating the combat from the time period of our assumed armor standard, certainly there's scope for playing in the SCA with the techniques that are documented, whether it's later period longsword or buckler techniques from 133 or what have you.
Well, I think that's the biggest thing, is it's just not out there, really. I mean, everything that started getting documented in actual forums and styles was really later period and stuff like that. I guess I can let Sterling in.
And
I suppose.
the armored stuff that's being done in 15th century armor right now, most of that is out of Glenavon, and it's coming out of the rapier community, right? They're doing 15th century fully armored longsword, but it's using cut and thrust rules. Right?
I think one of the things.
Go ahead.
I think one of the things that's the closest, I guess you could say, as far as SCA heavy is right now is like the deed of arms or the Battle of the 30, where, for example, it takes 3 blows to the head to stun, blows to anywhere else in the body don't count, only thrusts to the eye slots or the armpits count. So they're doing some things with some of the rules. But I think the deed is the closest that you're going to find right now, simply because of a lot of the rules that are in place for safety. Again, and as a polearm fighter, I'd love to be able to hit someone in the ankles, but that would be very bad.
Yeah, another thing you can do is to use SCA rules or slight variations of SCA rules to work on some of the unarmored material, like for example the 133 buckler stuff. You know, our system where a single blow kills or disables a limb is a lot closer to the effect of a sharp sword on an unarmored human than it is on armored combat. So there's that too.
I use a lot of George Silver and Bolognese broadsword when I'm fighting with a single broadsword, right? You know, that silver is really good for what we do because it's light, nice and simple, and it's mostly a cut, and it's for a basket hilted sword, right? So you can use your basket to block.
That's kind of interesting. Are there just not a lot of people looking at that, or is it, again, because it's harder to bring it into the game, it's sort of a side project where it exists?
I just don't think a lot of it exists, really. You know, that's the big thing.
There are a lot of people looking at various aspects of it. Duke Mark Darendel in the West Kingdom is mostly using German longsword in his longsword technique, right?
Yeah, I mean that's mainly what I'm thinking about, the longsword and maybe the I-33.
And he's using sword and buckler, but I think he's doing Talhofer's sword and buckler. I don't think he's doing 133. Mm-hmm. And then Reese was doing a lot of German longsword, and his favorite thing was Jus de la Hache, the French axe manual. And a lot of that works really well for SCA halberd. That's what Visivald is doing too. He's using Meyer and Jus de la Hache for his polearm work.
Okay. So there seems like there's some things to kind of pick out and see if I can find who's doing it. Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. So I guess I'll take a moment to introduce everybody who's on. Tonight we have Sir Jabril, we have Master Richard Crow, Sir Mo, because I'm not going into that giant alphabet of a name of yours, Sir Valgard, Sir Hassan, and Master Torvald, and then Thorson. I mean, he's here. So hit us up with any questions you have. You know, pretty much, I mean, ask me anything. If you want to talk about fighting or the order or perceptions, philosophies, go for it. Just want to make fun of Thorson, I support that as well. And Jabril. You can make fun of Jabril. I'm all right with that.
Your game is weak.
Yeah, because you're the only one that showed up in garb.
I hate you.
Let's see.
Hi, man.
Oh,
All right, I'll throw out a question maybe somebody can field while we're sitting here in awkward silence.
Sure.
One of the things that I get asked a lot by unbelts and up and coming fighters is, why does it take so long to get knighted in the East? Why does the path take such a long time for us compared to other kingdoms?
Wish I had $1 for every time I heard that.
Ooh,
Hi, Val.
ooh, ooh, ooh.
Go ahead.
A lot of it has to do with the OTC. A lot of OTCs would be knighted in most other kingdoms, and people get their OTC at about the same time of investment that they get their belt in a lot of other kingdoms. And other kingdoms have grant level fighting awards, but they give them out much earlier than we do, and ours is held to a really high standard. And so it's kind of evolved that you got to be beyond that standard in order to be considered for chivalry.
I was just going to say, because all kingdoms have a grant level fighting award, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And I don't think, no, not all of them. I don't think all of them do. I mean, when I moved here, and I've been here 20 years now, when I moved here, there wasn't one in the West. The joke was Viscount was the grant level fighting award, although it's really a patent, because you almost always won coronet and were prince before you got knighted anyway.
I'm not sure.
Good.
I'm not sure that we can say in such a neat category that it's because the OTC level is knight level in other kingdoms. I mean, it's basically, what is the skill level that we're looking for to give out an OTC? What is the skill level that we're looking for to give out chivalry, and to be recognized as chivalry? And the question really is, A, why is the bar where it is for OTC and chivalry? And why is there such a long gap for most people between getting their OTC and ultimately being recognized as a peer?
I think
Go ahead.
I think there's a bunch of different factors there. One is that, of course, where the bar is fluctuates sometimes wildly from reign to reign, sometimes even within a reign, depending on what their majesties decide to do. So there's that. I mean, there have been times in the East where it seemed like you practically had to be able to walk on water to be offered the accolade, and then there have been some royalty who seem to have had lower standards than most Eastern royalty. But aside from that, another issue is that even though we have a much larger number of skilled teachers of SCA fighting than we had, say, 20 years ago or even 10 years ago, I think that a lot of people are still not getting consistent training in a coherent system of SCA fighting, and some of that's on us to teach in a more efficient manner, but some of that's also due to the fact that a lot of people will have maybe one practice they can get to on a regular basis per week, as compared to, say, a judo or karate or Brazilian jiu-jitsu school where you can train 3, 4, 5 times a week with professional instructors in an organized manner. And whereas, let's say you have that one practice a week you can get to, it's probably not particularly organized, and there's a lot of variation in who shows up on any given night, whether there's any actual instruction, and what the quality of that instruction is.
Yeah.
I have to agree there, and I also think that one of the things too, and this is coming from a newer person in the order, is the sheer size of our
I was just
kingdom
going to say,
and trying to get the exposure. So being, let's say, a southern unbelt and trying to make it up north, or somebody who is northern and trying to make it down south, and really trying to get in front of those the members of chivalry that you want to, those decision makers, to really try to prove your self-worth. It's hard. It takes a lot of coin, and it takes a lot of dedication. Not saying that it's impossible and that people don't do it, but it definitely, I feel, takes a toll on a lot of people. And I feel that is something that needs to be acknowledged and recognized, because a lot of people are really of worth, but people from the different end of the kingdom are, have to either depend on a brother or sister in arms to say, hey, what do you think of this person? Or really try to go out of their way to see somebody who might be worthy or have been worthy for quite some time.
That ties in with a couple of points that are important to me. One of those points is that I see I've had too many unbelted fighters tell me that they have been told, sometimes by members of this order, that in order to get recognized, you're going to have to go to an event every weekend. You're going to have to, travel the entire length and breadth of the kingdom. Here is a list of a dozen events that you must hit, or you won't have any chance of being elevated. You must, be at fighter practice 3 times a week, and so on and so forth. And none of that's true. And we shouldn't be telling people that, right? I mean, sure, if you can go to a practice twice a week every week rather than once a week, yeah, if you're paying attention to detail and training with focus, you'll probably progress significantly faster than the guy who can only get to practice once a week plus doing some solo work. But that guy going to practice once a week and doing some solo work can still progress. It's just going to take longer. And likewise, in regard to going to events, okay, we all have constraints on what we can do based on available money and work and family obligations and so on. So instead of telling people crap like they have to go to an event every weekend, let's give them something realistic. So let's say, for example, that due to some combination of finances and work and family obligations, you can get to an event outside your local area once per quarter. Okay, cool. Pick 4 events during the year that draw a bunch of Chiv from at least a couple of different areas in the case of each event. Go to those events and get as much fighting in as possible. And there again, an unbelted that does that probably isn't going to progress as fast as the unbelted fighter that can get to more events that draw a lot of Chiv. But that person that can only get to those 4 events outside his or her local region per year, they can still progress, they can still make it. And furthermore, depending on the quality of their teachers and training partners and how focused they are in their training, they may not progress that much slower than the person who can get to more events or more practices, but maybe isn't so dedicated or so focused and has a high ratio of standing around bullshitting versus actual fighting. So I think we need to be realistic in what we tell people about that. The other thing is that, at least in online discussions, I see a lot of misunderstanding about the idea that you have to become known. Like, a distressing number of people seem to think that it's some kind of popularity contest, a question of making friends among the Chiv. And I think we need to try to help people understand that the point is that I can't tell the Crown whether or not someone fights at Chiv level or displays the other virtues needed to be worthy of the accolade if I don't know who this person is, right? I need to have at least seen someone fight and hopefully fought them myself. And the same thing in regard to comportment and service and so on.
When we discuss candidates, I end up abstaining on at least 30% of the candidates because I just don't have the experience with them to make any comment.
Well, see, that's one of the misconceptions I think that gets out there, is that when the order tells somebody, well, you have to travel, we may not explain it well enough that it's not to get out and make, like you said, make friends and garner votes. It's so we know who the hell you are and stuff like that. That's the main reason. If you never leave, the southern region, nobody in Canada is going to know you. Nobody in the northern region is going to know you, and they can't vote with an honest heart on something like that.
There's 2 things that I always tell my local guys, especially. One is much like what was previously said about choosing those key events. But when you're at that event, be a force to be reckoned with. Let your stick do the talking and then show your comportment off the field. That's number 1. And number 2 is also, there's more practices throughout the year than events. So if you can make it out to those practices to get in front of some of those people, like we said prior, don't bullshit, get to the practice, do what you got to do, be seen with your helmet on, putting in the work. And I feel those are 2 key factors I'd like to emphasize, and I think need to be emphasized more within the East so people understand exactly what it really does take. Because I think some people take for granted the fact that helmet time and practice is the ultimate way to get to shit.
If I can just add one more thing, and then maybe we can go on, because there's a bunch of questions in the queue. One thing that I do want to say, from what I've seen over the past 2 decades, I guess I've been around now.
Decades.
There are 3 people that came up very quickly and got knighted very quickly. And everybody kind of looks at them and says, well, they have this unique talent, this skill, like this mystique. Ozer, Ionis, and
Arn?
Harm. Sorry, I like his name. Those guys came up really fast. And the big difference between them and their contemporaries, frankly, was practice. They were hitting 3 practices a week, and they were hitting events on the weekends as well. It's not just a matter of going to a bunch of different events and getting FaceTime so the knights can know who you are. If you are hitting 3 practices and you are putting people down at those practices, there's going to be buzz about you amongst the Chiv, and people are going to be looking and people are going to be talking about it. So when you do make it to those events and you do make it to those tournaments and you do reasonably well, you do very well, or you have a bad day, you're going to be noticed. You're going to be recognized. People can go back and look at video, look at pictures and say, oh yeah, I heard about that. Oh yeah, I saw that. So even though they don't know them personally or have seen them personally, it's the practice that makes the huge difference in how fast some people can progress. Too many people want to go to like one practice here or there, take a little bit of advice, go do their own thing, and practice 5 times a week on their own, but they're practicing the wrong thing. And they're attending one practice where they're actually getting training. That's counterproductive.
I think there's one other thing. So there's one other thing that Hassan and Torvald touched on a little bit that I wanted to say directly. When you're at an event and Chiv are on the field for pickups, fight us. I don't know how many times there have been events where I've stood around and the unbelts walk by me. They walk by, I'll watch them walk by other knights, other masters to fight other unbelts. There was a particular event where I was there with Master, oh my God, my brain stopped working, Evalder, and he and I looked at each other after about 5 minutes of standing around because we just had 5 or 6 unbelts walk by us. It's hard to really get a sense of if someone is good enough if they're not coming up to us. So we're on the field for pickups. Please come up to us.
And let me also say that that also shows us who's hungry, right?
Very true.
If the unbelted fighters are all fighting each other and not coming and fighting us, then that tells us how hungry they are. Or it means they think we're dicks.
Which is they'd want to come out and beat us up.
Entirely possible.
Right.
All right. So, oops, my scroll. So there's a question that we can segue right into from that. It's asked, how does the path compare to other kingdoms? I don't have a lot of reference for this, so I was hoping Anton would be here. He probably has the most. But does anyone have any insight to how it would compare to other kingdoms?
We are entirely
Unique.
prowess bound. Our path tends to be tightly wound with your prowess ability. Many other kingdoms, especially the West and on tier, it's showmanship. It's a big game out there. Part of the package is how you present yourself. That tends to be a pro and a con for them because they end up with some very charismatic people who are also good fighters. There's no, I'm not giving them slack for that. But I also know some folks out there who are really good fighters, but they're kind of shy and they don't like putting on that show. So some of those folks run into issues out there as far as like that ability. So if you're a big character, and you're a big ham like Willie, then sure, you've got an opportunity out there to do well. If you're the quiet guy who's sensible and rational like Torvald, then it's harder for you. Whereas in the East, if you come out and you kick my butt, I'm gonna know who you are. Down south, it's kind of a mixed bag. Atlantia is very similar to the East in their methods, but further south, they and it's interesting to actually compare because one of my concerns is that the East is actually becoming known only as a prowess kingdom, a chivalry thug type kingdom,
That's true.
where the other attributes are not viewed upon, as important or whatever, and that's hysterical because like look at Jan and his woodwork or his calligraphy. Look at the ANS capabilities of the Eastern Shiv is actually amazing to me, but it's not broadcast. Whereas you get down in Florida and Georgia and New Orleans and that area, and they are expected to show off their arts and sciences and their other capabilities, and we just don't, or we're not bragging about it. And with the exception of people like Victor or Anton and people like that, who's I don't know where those guys get their learning curve from, but they're amazing. It's a bit different that way because when you're in the known world and you think Eastern Shiv, you think, God, that guy's going to kick my butt, and that is the first thing that's on your brain. And I'm kind of okay with that, but it's not always the premier mentality for chivalry worldwide.
I think to a certain extent that's true. The path is different in every kingdom. I've lived in 3 kingdoms and tourneyed extensively in 2 others, and the path is a little bit different in every kingdom. But it's not that different in the East than it is in the West, which are the 2 places I spent most of my time. It's significantly different in Kaid, right, than it is in either of those places, which is the other kingdom that I've lived in. My path was, it took me 11 years to get knighted from when I started fighting in the West Kingdom, which is not long here. At the time, it was a little bit long for being in the West. I had to overcome being an asshole teenager without supervision, which is how most people met me when I joined the SCA, and so I had a lot of baggage to get rid of. And before I could get knighted, I won the Principality Bardic Championship. I won the dance competition. I served in like 3 or 4 different offices. I got the Kingdom Arts and the Sciences Award, right? But that's not that uncommon here. And it wasn't universal there either. I mean, a lot of people, by the time they get the accolade here, have got their Munch, right? They've got their Silver Crescent. They have done most of the stuff that a chivalry candidate would be expected to do in all the other kingdoms, except maybe dance. Not a lot of our chivalry dance out here, right? So I don't think it's that different, right? I do think there's an emphasis in prowess. I had an Eastern Duke tell me once when I asked in the council if somebody danced, tell me, oh, we don't care about that stuff out here, right? Which was a long time ago, and I kind of shut up about it after that because I was still learning how to act like an Easterner. But that turned out not to be true too.
All right. Let's see. The questions are piling up, so let's see what we got here. Okay. What do you look? Excuse me. What do you look for when taking a student squire / man at arms? What kind of what traits do you look for in a potential man at arms or squire?
I'm looking for.
Go ahead, Torvo.
Okay.
Is Mo's mic on? Your mic working there, Mo?
Oh yeah.
So I'm looking for someone that aspires to earn the accolade of chivalry, emphasis on earn, and is willing to work hard toward that end. I don't have any issue with other Shiv that don't focus as much on that, but that's my focus. So I'm looking for someone that that shows me that they're motivated to work hard. I'm looking for someone where I think that they're going to be a good student for me and I'm going to be a good teacher for them, because the fact that someone may be a good teacher for a lot of people doesn't mean that he's the best teacher for a specific individual, and the same with students as far as who's the right student for the right teacher. But if I think it's a good fit that way, and if I think that the prospective squire is a good person, and if my lady wife approves, then yeah, it's mostly about that desire to do the work. And if someone needs to take time off due to work concerns, family concerns, money, injuries, then yeah, of course. But I want someone who, as much as they're able, is gonna do the work and focus on trying to excel. I spend a lot of extra time with my squires, um, doing doing work with them both at open practices, and I also do some backyard practices just for my guys. Um, so that's yeah, that's the main thing for me. Somebody that I think is a good person that gets along well with me and with my lady wife and my current squires. Someone that where I think it's a good fit as far as am I the right coach for this person, or are they the right student for me, and is this somebody that really wants to bust their ass to excel?
I personally, the most important thing that I look for is a person's character. I think that you can always teach someone to hit somebody with a stick, and if they're willing to put in the time and the effort, they'll be able to master the martial art. So I'm content with someone who's not naturally gifted at physical activity and someone who is. I want someone who's got good character, who cares about other people, who cares about not how they look, but do they do things well. You know, it's important to me that the person is really interested in the art of fighting, the form of combat, and not just the accolade and glory that comes with winning. Winning is completely secondary. Um, they have to have some level of artistic skill in something. Find whatever it is you like. Um, some um, some people are okay with, do you support the arts? I think that a squire needs to have an art, and a squire needs to actually work at that art, because part of learning the patience of a new art is the same skills that you're applying to learning combat. So those are the things that are most important to me: who the person is as a whole, and are they willing to dedicate their time to learning? You know, what are they willing to sacrifice in their mundane life to focus on their medieval skills?
I have to double down on that as well. Even though I'm newer, one of the biggest things that I'm looking at is somebody who's a forever student, how I feel that I am. You know, never being satisfied in what you know, regardless of where you are naturally uh, in athleticism, just always striving to be better than what you were yesterday. I think that was something that my master, Ruslan, really instilled in us, was always, you want to be better, a better person um, as a fighter, on the field, off the field, as you were the day prior. So that's number one. Number two is like somebody like me, I come from a huge chosen family household, and my family is very important. So somebody who meshes well with myself as well as those that I trust around me is very key, because character will forever show through. It doesn't matter how much you try to put on airs, you try to play the character or try to act like you're something that you're not. Who you truly are will forever shine through. And that is very big with me, because a clash of personality could destroy a relationship, whether it's mundanely or within the SBA, and besides that, obviously, having that desire to want to have that end goal. I like people who are goal driven. So you understand that, yes, I want to be Shiv, and I'm where I'm at right now. And you really are truly ready to focus your attention on how to get there, and not being humble enough to take the criticism. It's okay to know where you're at. It's okay to be confident in who you are, but you have to still be able to take those criticisms and build off of that to become a better person. So those things are extremely, extremely important to me. I think that's why I've had a couple people who are very interested right now, but I think I'm being very picky, because I myself want to make sure that I'm also a good match for them. I know it was said previously, but I just want to also reinstate that you can be very good friends with somebody and be a good instructor with somebody, but if you don't feel that you can better that person either on the field or off the field, then maybe there's somebody else who may be better for them. And I would hate to be the person to hinder them on their path. So it's a two-way street. Not only, yes, I want them to be a good student and want to strive, but I also continuously strive to be better myself every day, a better man, a better knight, a better husband. So with that, I try to make sure that if I'm going to put myself in this person's life, because the role of squire could be a forever, it's not a rank, it's a job, and it could be a forever role, that that person is ready, for better or worse, to take those next steps with me and trust me enough, and I trust them enough, that we can be involved in one another and proceed towards their end goal, and hopefully then I can watch them cross that threshold.
All right. Let's see what we got here next. Next question is, let me get this into my face here. Following up on the bar questions, if tomorrow you had to become a red belt, as you are right now, would you be willing to start over on the path of Chiv? If so, what are 3 things you would do differently?
Yes.
Start fencing.
Yes. One of the things I would do is shut the hell up.
Yes.
I would listen more. That's a huge thing. I would shut straight the hell up. And I know there's a lot of people smiling and nodding and saying, thank you for me saying that out loud. But I would just shut up and listen.
That's not about you. That's about me.
Me too.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely
me too.
That's the universal me. That's the royal me. That me means everybody watching. You know?
We've all experienced that at some point.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
pretty sure
like
that's
Val,
not
I was
true
with
for
you.
Torvald.
I was that 19-year-old kid who played the game and had to work my way past being that asshole, and then separating myself from that and becoming the man that I am today. So I felt you 100% when you were saying that. So yeah, I'd shut up.
Anyone else?
I wanted to comment on that. I was actually the exact opposite in the beginning. I was extremely quiet, and I listened to everybody, and I didn't really express myself for a very long time. And maybe my position was a little bit different. And the reason that I'm bringing it up is why it was different for me than it is for a lot of the other people who came up in the chivalry, and why it's particularly applicable looking at a lot of the people who are in this room right now. For me, when I came in, I was gay. Most of the SCA didn't know about it, not because I was in the closet, but just it's not something that came up when we were fighting, and I wasn't interested in dating anyone in the SCA, so it never came up. But I was always a little bit reluctant to encounter what I thought would be homophobia in a very testosterone-driven environment. I think if I had to do it over again, I would be less quiet. I would be a lot more vocal than I was before. And I say that because I see a lot of women in this group right now, a lot of women who are interested in fighting, a lot of women who have heard negative things about the male environment of heavy weapons fighting. And I can tell you with sincerity that the sort of coming out process for me in the Chiv and in the fighting community was interesting, because I don't even know how it happened. Somebody must have mentioned it to somebody, and then the gravy train got started and everybody started talking about it. And people who I always kind of thought might have been homophobic or kind of uncomfortable would come up to me and say, hey, I didn't know you were gay. I don't know why you kept it quiet. It's not a big deal. Welcome aboard, man. It makes no difference to me. And that was the reaction that I got from pretty much everybody in the heavy community. Nobody cared. And there's this perception that women fighters are afraid to talk to people or afraid of encountering people who are going to block them. And I think there are still some dinosaurs in our game who are potentially problematic. But as a whole, I encourage fighters to speak up and to be known and to make their concerns and their issues heard. There's a difference between being arrogant and headstrong and being open and opinionated about what you're experiencing and what you're going through. And I think the important thing is to find that balance as you're coming up. And we all do. It's just, when that happens. But I don't know that I agree with the idea that shut up applies to everybody.
Oh no, I just meant in the arrogant sense.
And I meant that's what would apply to me.
Hey, man.
Mhm.
Me too.
Pretty sure it never applied to Torvald.
No. No.
When he was younger, he was a chatty Cathy.
There are several things I would do differently. I would train smarter rather than harder. I would start right out paying a lot more attention to nutrition, dynamic warm-ups, post-workout stretching, smart strength training. And I wouldn't go to as many events, but I would do more like what I was talking about before, pick a relatively small number of events where there would be lots of Chiv and high-end unbelteds and get the most bang for my buck in that regard. Starting now at married 54 years old. I have a career, a job that's certainly more demanding than what I was doing when I was in my early to mid 20s. So, I would take realistic account of that, rather than back then when I was in a position to spend pretty much all of my free time doing doing SCA stuff, and I had the resiliency of youth, so I could get away with a certain amount of stupidity.
All right. Let's see what we got here. Next one is, are you or have you worked as a group to make your practices better, or to make changes to build some structure that can better support fighters? Yeah, that's a big thing. It seems like everybody teaches different in every single barony in the kingdom. There's not a whole lot of training standardization, I guess you could say. I know we're pretty guilty of that as much as anyone else, I think.
There's so many different styles, so many different fighting styles, that it's really hard to narrow down sort of a technique. I have 5 squires now, and each of them have very, very, very different skill sets. And I found that you can have a basic form, a basic idea of what combat is, and then you have to look at each person's attributes. What can they do? What are they good at physically? And build on that. Some people may be the ultimate fake game so they can throw the flat snap like Stefan, and some people are better off at doing a bunch of combos to make people move and then throwing that super fast offside as their bread and butter shot. And you really have to take a basic defense and stance and power generation and build from that. If someone, I have a squire who has bad knees, he cannot do twisting on the balls of his feet as easily as the other squires. So we have to adjust everything in our basic style to work with his body mechanics. And it's something that I think we really need to focus on as a whole. We have a group for women fighter that we had begun discussing this, the different mechanics of the female body. And one of the things that I've thought about where that is concerned specifically is the basic fighting that we do. All these different styles and power generation are really all geared towards the male physique. And if women's bodies are balanced differently and their elbows bend differently, is the flat snap or an offside the right shot for them to be throwing at all? Do we need to really adjust the mechanics entirely? And I don't know what the answer is to that, but I have certainly put a lot of thought into it. I've spoken with some other female Shiv and gotten some input from them about mechanics and training. But we're really at the infancy of developing female fighters to be better fighters within the guidelines of the SCA rules.
So I'm going to touch on that just for a second. One of the things is that I'm atypically small compared to a lot of the fighters out there. I'm about 5'5". I weigh about 60 out of armor. So a lot of the techniques at the very beginning weren't really working well for me. And so I got lucky that I was able to hook up with Duke Randall, as well as get some lessons from Duke Griff, Duke Edward, Zippy, Sir Matthew, a lot of people who are really, very body mechanic focused, and were able to help me with the power generation. And what it made me realize is that not just for women, but I think we don't do a great job with teaching smaller fighters how to generate power.
Mhm.
And one of the things that started working for me, and it doesn't work for everyone. I don't know how many people remember Fast Eddie O'Rourke. When he taught polearm technique, he based it all on tango dancing. And a lot of what I've started teaching, and that has worked for smaller fighters in our community, is some of the Latin dancing hip action. And it seems to translate very well for smaller fighters as well as for female fighters. That motion just seems to work really well. And I can tell you that some of our smaller, very small fighters, female, like Lacey, I don't know how many people know Embla, can hit pretty hard because of how they're moving their hips. And a lot of their style comes more from dancing than from more of a traditional martial art, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'd like to bring up a couple of related points. I think that what we should be doing as teachers, as coaches, is teaching a set of fundamentals that can be of use to pretty much anyone who can physically execute them, but with the understanding that there's going to be a need to adapt the execution of those fundamentals to the individual's capabilities and limitations. And in some cases, you may have an athlete that that can't do some of your standard fundamentals and all, like Jarrell mentioned, the guy who had particularly bad knees and can't do certain things. But the other point, and this is not any kind of definitive answer, but as far as women compared to men, if I look at other combat sports, whether it's boxing or wrestling or judo or MMA, I don't see any difference in technique. There's not a women's version of a right cross or a double leg takedown or any of the fundamental judo throws. I see exactly the same mechanics with variations, not consistent variations with men versus women, but variations depending on the individual. So that doesn't mean for sure that there aren't fundamental differences in mechanics when it comes to hitting someone with a stick as opposed to fighting using only your own body. But I have doubts about the claim that there are any consistent across the board differences in mechanics that work for men versus women.
Well, if I can, Torvald, an example. Let me see if I can explain this. It's been rolling around in my head for a long time. So I call it strong guy-itis. A lot of new fighters, male fighters, tend to fight by using their upper body, right? The power generation is from their shoulders and from their upper back. That's where they're strongest. And so a lot of our mechanics have developed off of using this, not your core. It looks like you're using your core, and some of the more advanced fighters are using their core, but a lot of male fighters are fighting from here. That's not as good a place for women to generate power because their shoulders are not as strong as their core. So the mechanics for them have to start from the strongest place. So when I say that maybe the flat snap or the offside is not the best shot for them, it's because those are shots that have a lot of shoulder mechanics to generate power. Maybe the way to throw their shots is to draw straight from the core and let your shoulders follow. And if that's true, then what's the best shot, or what's the best shot that will lead to a shot that you can follow up from effectively? Is it flat snap? Is it offside? It might be. In the final analysis, you might be right. It might end up being the same thing. And we just have to work on transitioning the focus of developing the power from the core as opposed to the upper body. But it might also be that we have to go completely outside of the box and look at a different way of throwing those shots, a different way of turning the wrist so that you're not serving the soup and getting a flat hand, to get the power generation and the mechanics of the slightly different elbow to work. That's what I mean when I say that we have to really tweak it and look at how female bodies work as opposed to male.
So one of the things that made a lot of sense when recently was something that my daughter was learning from American Ninja Warrior when they were teaching her how to do some of her stuff.
Robot Crow's back.
Yeah, you're breaking up pretty bad.
Lost you, Crow.
Put another quarter in your laptop.
Oh gosh.
That was actually funny.
Oh, sorry. Let's try that again. So you hear me better now?
No, but
Breaking up really bad.
I think you're back now, Crow.
Yeah, that looks better.
Okay, thanks. So one of the things that when we talk about outside of the box that makes a lot of sense is something that came from my daughter's American Ninja Warrior coach, and that is the concept of the kinetic chain, where you're generating your power using your entire body as, again, generating that kinetic energy by chaining all your muscles together. And it seems, for some of the people I've worked with and myself, thinking of that whole body as a chain, as a kinetic chain, allows me to throw some of the shots that I used to not be able to generate power for. Now I can generate more power. And that seems to work with a lot of people at our local practice too, is that concept of the kinetic chain.
Yeah, I agree regarding the use of the core and also the legs and hips and the kinetic chain, but my perspective is that that is the most efficient way for everyone to generate power. Even if you're very strong on the upper body and you can easily throw a killing blow with just your arm, just your chest, or just maybe getting some of your other upper body muscles in there, it's still more efficient if you generate power by using your legs, hips, and core to turn your body both to accelerate the weapon and to provide follow through. And that's the way I was taught. Farrell obviously isn't a big guy, so he taught good fundamental body mechanics that would work even if you weren't big and you weren't strong. And although I'm not exactly a small human, when I started fighting, I was actually physically weak just due to not having done much in the way of strength training or contact sports. So I had to learn good mechanics right from the start to be effective. So I think my view is, teach everybody to generate power by using that whole foot, leg, hip, back, core kinetic chain, using the core to link to the upper body.
And I think that is something of an issue, right? The Bellatrix style, which was really influential in the first 10 years of the SCA, is based on judo, and everything is. Yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt real quick, but looks like we have a storm coming over. We just had lightning and a little bit of a flicker. So if everyone drops out, I'll just turn it back on. If we get power back within a few minutes or something, I'll just jack it back on. Otherwise, we'll just have to reschedule. So just give you guys a heads up.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'm just chilling.
Go ahead, Val.
Oh, sorry. Okay. But I've gotten into arguments with Chivalry, or not arguments, discussions with Chivalry here in this kingdom about whether or not to use the core at all, right? There's a huge variation of technique. I know 6 or 7 different techniques for generating power, besides the foot to hip to core to shoulder to elbow technique that I was taught, right? And I do think that that's the most efficient technique, but there are a lot of other techniques that are being taught there. Some of them require more strength, some of them require less. Some of them require shoulder and back strength, some of them require forearm strength, right? And we don't have any kind of consistency in that regard.
So what I think is hysterical is the question was, how are you guys working to make practices better? And only we could devolve this into a mechanics.
You're right.
So I want to actually answer the original.
You
In order to make
answer that, but I just want to say that some of this is answering it already.
Oh,
but
yeah,
I'll get back to it.
cool. But there's also the general making practice better. Making practice better means making it fun. It means making it social. It means making it inclusive, and it means trying to engage with groups around you. those are some things that it doesn't matter what style you teach or what style you learn or what your body mechanics are, that will actually help every single fighter in the group. And the more that you can play with your neighbors, the more exposed to new techniques and thoughts and ideas and mechanics you will be. So I wish we could do this right now, pack up the van with all of the locals and take them the next practice over. Maybe, you know, in a couple months down the road, but that is something that you can do to make practices better, is actually getting us exposed to one another's styles, thoughts, mentalities, fighting practices, working with one another, you know, raise the tide for everybody and all boats will get higher.
Well, that's one of the things I was going to add on there is right before this whole mess started, I was trying to really travel more, get out more, go to practices a little further away, hit maybe baronies that don't have any Chiv within, you know, who knows how far. But yeah, I know I'm guilty of being very insular. I would go to Dragonship Havens practice or, you know, Bloodguard practice, and that's about it, and events. But I was really trying to make the effort to get out and travel and go to places that don't, like I said, don't see a lot of Chiv, or places I don't get to see very often, and fight other people and give them variety, because stagnation will destroy your game faster than anything sometimes when you're just fighting the same 10 people over and over and over and over. And you go to an event and a tourney and you fight somebody that's a little different and you just get whooped and you can't figure out why. So once we can all get back out again, that's one of my plans, is definitely travel a lot more and to travel to places that either aren't a lot of people or I wouldn't normally go or stuff like that. So
As a Shire, one of the things that we did was the date of our practice. So the Shire Millville practices on a Tuesday, and we set that up on purpose because we didn't want to infringe on any other practices that were in a reasonable driving distance, which is about an hour to an hour and a half. So you had, you know, Tuesday nights would be Shire Midland Vale, then Wednesday, you know, you would have your Hawthorne, Thursday Nutley, or vice versa, whichever one it is. And then there's Northern Hall and Northern Fjord. So in our area, what we did was, as you know, content creators, essentially, we basically discuss, okay, when is your local practice? Let's try to make it so if you have that really froggy person who wants to hit up multiple events or multiple practices in 1 week, they could go Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and there's always something. So we can try to get that continuity of standard, as well as getting the fighter a different view, so they don't say, oh, well, you know, I really wanted to go practice with this person over in Midland Vale on Tuesday, but, you know, I want to go to Northern Hall and go up and see, you know, Count Ivan, you know. So it's one of those things where I think discussing with your local areas their time frames, and then trying to plan it so the fighters can actually have an opportunity to go out there and make themselves known during practices is a huge thing. It makes it super fun too.
On the rare occasion that I run a practice, my practice is very structured, but most of the time I go to other people's practices where we're just putting on armor and we're hitting each other, and that's our practice. So it depends on where you are. I do a lot of unarmored slow work and unarmored drills, and then get into armor, and then I do set situations. I do drills more than I do fighting. I try to have a little melee, not to practice melee, but because melee is a lot of fun, and it helps to keep the practice fun, right? And so I'll, you know, and we'll do, okay, now I'm going to fight my next, each of us is going to take a fight from our knees, and we're going to stand up and we're going to rotate through this. So we're practicing fighting on our knees, fighting standing, right? Maybe we'll practice without our shield, right? And we'll be doing as much drilling as we are just bashing each other, right? So I have a very structured way that I like to run a practice. And when I was local marshal, I got to do that. But most of the time, that's not what people want to do, to be honest.
I found that what worked well for me with local practices was to offer more structured training as an option. So I'd say, okay, folks that are at a point where tonight they just want to go fight somebody, cool. You can go over there and do that. We're going to have this area over here where I'm going to do some more structured training. And if you're into that, cool. And what my experience was that, yeah, some people would go and just fight, but a significant number of people would come looking for more organized training, but yet nobody felt like it was being, imposed on them from above. And so for me, that fit in well with the generally, informal and less organized nature of SCA practice as opposed to something like a judo or Brazilian jiu-jitsu class.
All right.
Oh, I was about to say something.
Who's that?
Mo speaks.
Whoa!
Yeah,
All right, everyone, shush.
Here in the north, we're pretty isolated, so every fighters are really precious. So when there's one newbie or newcomers coming, everybody jump on him, and it's wonderful. But the thing we're taking care of first is they need to have fun. We don't teach anything before 3, 4, maybe 5 practices, even the flat snap, nothing. We just want to, hey, go have fun, experiment something. And we're looking at the boy too, or the girl, because they can learn you some stuff, how they fight, how they move, what they can bring to the sport. Of course, we don't have to forget that the sport is pretty new, even if it's like 50 years old, it's pretty new. There's not a lot of books, not a lot of great teachers who know everything, and not a lot of Bruce Lees. So it's precious for me to look at newcomers and see what they can bring to the sports. And during those 5 practices, they're trying stuff that they don't have any sense. they get killed really fast. But sometimes they're bringing some stuff that you say, hey, that's a nice move. That's something that we don't see often. And you start from there and you build stuff around the way they are and what they bring. And I think this is the key for us to take part. I'll do the things together, just not a teacher and a student relationship. It's more of a, everybody brings something to the pool, and we're having fun. But it's a lot of, hey, take your time, have fun, look at the group. We're having fun here. Do you fit in? Do you love this, spirit of fighting, the camaraderie and everything? And I love the way that it started. And when I remember, it was mostly the people who were there were taking time with me or having fun with me than the techniques and if I was good or not.
Hey, just real quick, Mo, you got to check your connection. Your voice sounded really weird.
Oh, because I'm French.
So, we'll move on to the next question, but I just had one thing I wanted to add real quick. Oh, easy, Polandros, I see you. One thing I just wanted to add is one thing I always say in a mantra at our practices is that practice is for practicing. You can't go out there and think you're fighting an attorney every single fight and you get upset when you lose, or if you get upset because you're off a night. So it's irrelevant. Practice is for practicing. Go out for one shot all night. It's irrelevant. But at the end of the night, you'll get really good at that one shot or that one block. So that's just something I try to push, is to take the pressure off of people. Practice is for practicing. It's not for winning. It's not for showing off or anything. So, all right. So let's see. Next we have, with so much time off, do you think that the bar will be lowered? How will this time off alter your judgment of a new member? Do you mean a new member of the order or a new member of the SCA/fighter, Sterling? Sterling.
Got his headset off.
That figures. Well, we'll just answer the top part of it. Additionally, he has follow-up on traveling. After being knighted, how much time do you do to travel to be available to others who do not get to travel much, or for Western, Far North, etc.? We touched on that a little. Sterling, you got your ears on now? Hold on. All right, go ahead. Yeah, I just wanted to know when your part of your question, it says, how will this time off alter your judgment of a new member? Do you mean new member of the order or new member of the SCA period?
New member of the order.
Okay, all right, cool. Okay, does anybody want to jump on that? If anyone thinks that all this time off will lower the bar or will it affect judgment of new members?
Honestly, I don't think it'll lower the bar at all. Reason
I agree.
being is you take your path onto yourself. So honestly, and I don't want to sound too much like a dick when I say this, but it's that judgment is really put onto you. Like me personally, I took it upon myself to participate in the Pell challenges that you see online. I mean, yes, I have the capabilities of having a Pell and doing such type of training, but that is something that I said to myself. You know, I'm going to do this. This is something that I'm betting myself to. The challenge is for 100 shots minimum for 100 days straight. I personally do it for 100 each hand, and I try to push more. So it's all about, again, self-betterment, whether that is mentally in the game and reading some literature that might get you there, like The Art of War, The Book of Five Rings, The Inner Game of Tennis, or it's going out there and actually training yourself. So me personally, no, that I would feel it to be an excuse.
I would think that it's not going to lower bar only because from a personal experience, right before everything shut down, I got my hand and wrist jacked up at a practice. And if it wasn't for doing nothing for the last 5 months, I'd probably still be hurt. So it's a good time to rest up and heal. Anyone else? Anyone have any insight on will it affect judgment of a new member at all? I don't think
No.
I don't judge new members.
Yeah,
I-
yeah, me neither.
yeah.
Anyone, any other thoughts or on that? Let's see what the second part. I think Sterling, I think we touched on the second part a little bit afterwards about the traveling. How I know personally, I'm going to try to travel a lot more to hit more practices, and I'm sure once we're all set free, people are just going to go nuts and try to do as many practices as they can anyway. So just to get out there and beat on each other once again. Will it stay the norm? I hope so. I hope we don't fall back into bad habits again and just become insular. So we shall see.
Just to answer part of his question, should we have more tourneys? I'm of two minds. I think we need to have more fun melee events, and I think we need to have more tourneys. For the fighters who like tourneys and do well at them, I think they should have more exposure. For the fighters who are interested in them, they should have more exposure. We need to do more just speed tourneys. There's nothing wrong with that. It gives us a chance to really see people and to for the individual to experience one-on-one combat where they can put their training together. But I also think we need to do a lot more fun, small melee events where people can just come out and do different things and have a good time and not be in the spotlight. One of the things that we had talked about as a group was, what do we look for? It's easier to see someone's skill in a tourney than it is to see them in the middle of a melee. But we have a lot of fighters who are really good melee fighters. We have a lot of knights who are better melee fighters than they are tourneys. And I think it's important not to have our fighting evaluation and our growth as an order focused entirely on tourneys. So more tourneys, sure, for the people that like them, but also more attention to what's happening in melees and more melee events.
And it looks like a wild Seychelles appears.
Yes, you do. Very wild. I'm okay. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. Let's give you a quick, we've basically just been running down the chat. People have been entering their questions in the chat. We've just been kind of answering them as they go along. If there's any that are geared towards anyone specific, I'll chime in and let them know. Otherwise, it's pretty much whomever just wants to chime in on something. So
Okay. Beautiful.
Right. Now, the ultimate question is, where the hell did I leave off? We got that one. Wait a minute. Okay, here we go. How important do you feel weapons depth is?
I love weapons depth. It's extremely important. I mean, it just adds to the fighter, in my opinion, and you enrich the game by making yourself better. So You know, a whole game with just everybody in weapon and shield, stagnant. A whole bunch of people with just spear, stagnant. Mixing it up, getting the archer in there, getting the siege weapons. So weapon depth to me is huge. Two sword, great weapon. It also shows, again, how hungry you are to better yourself. So to just stick with one thing, while I'm not saying that that person who loves to specialize on sword and board doesn't know what they're doing, but to show that the respect in the other weapon forms, not only does it make you a better fighter in that it's gonna widen your arsenal, but also it gives you a first-hand understanding of how to defend against those particular weapon forms, because there's no better way to learn about the weakness of a weapon than actually utilizing it.
It's a requirement to be a member of the chivalry to have weapons depth.
It's kind of an unspoken rule, though. In that,
Yeah, I don't think it's written, but
no,
isn't it?
Whenever
Isn't
someone
it?
comes up, they're like, "Well, do they fight any other forms?" So
You can argue back and forth over the, get into endless semantic arguments about the meaning of the phrase "weapons of tournament combat" in the in corpora.
There used to be an actual definition. There was a written rule what those 5 weapons were once upon a time. But I think they lost it in like 75 or 76.
Before my time. So for that said, for myself, I think that weapons depth is desirable. I think there's a lot to be said for the idea that a member of this order should be reasonably dangerous with pretty much anything. But I don't have a specific number of weapons forms that I think someone needs to be competent with, or a specific level that I think someone has to achieve with a secondary weapons form. So I definitely like to see weapons depth, but I've certainly said yes on candidates that were heavily focused on their primary form, and I do think a candidate needs to be able to hang with most of the Chiv one-on-one best form versus best form.
I think we've recently admitted a couple members, people we talked about earlier, into this order who really excelled in one weapon form and didn't really branch out much. I don't remember ever seeing Arn. I mean, up until just before he got elevated, he went to 2-sword, but I don't ever remember seeing Arn with a great sword or a pole arm. I don't remember ever seeing
in practice
Ionis.
a lot, but yeah.
Was he?
Yeah.
I don't remember seeing Ionis, but with their one form so good, it's, I mean, the definition of, member of chivalry, I mean. Oh, did he? Wow, I didn't know that, Ozier. Cool. But I think having that one, if you're only going to have one form, for me, it has to be absolutely phenomenal. If not, having a couple weapons, your secondary, your tertiary, at least OTC level to me is kind of important.
let's see.
I think at some point, if you have an extreme level of mastery over one weapons form, it's going to transfer anyway. The basics are the basics pretty much universally. So it will come naturally if you devote enough time. For me, I like to see it simply because it will actually depthen that person's understanding and knowledge of how to fight with their weapons form, even if it's against the new weapons form. It just makes it more rounded.
Twice in my fighting career, once when I was seeking the accolade, and once more recently, I've been told by my trainers to stop using so many different weapons forms and just concentrate on your sword and shield.
Very old school philosophy.
And I needed that to get knighted. I really did. It wasn't until I dropped round shield and axe, and I dropped Danish great axe, and I dropped my two-handed sword and just started fighting sword and shield that I got knighted. Right? That was what was important at that moment to me. So.
I would like to circle around back to something real quick that Jabril brought up earlier when we were talking about mechanics and everything. I really wanted to get Seichel's opinion on this. I was hoping I would come up afterwards. Jabril, you just want to repeat briefly what you went over, or I would like to get Seichel's opinion as a member of the Chiv and as a female, any struggles she had specifically dealing with. And Seichel's been around a while, like a bunch of us have, on having to deal with being taught the standardized techniques and having to adapt to it, and if she really had any struggles with it, if that makes sense. I'm about as articulate as a baseball bat. So
I'm not going to go through a whole reiteration, but basically, Seichel, it's something that we had spoken about before, about whether or not women have different body mechanics and whether our traditional methods of training are best suited for different physical types of women.
You can hear me, guys?
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I realized I muted myself before. Honestly, no. I mean, if someone has the drive to hit someone, they have it, or they don't. It's that simple. Some women are simply afraid to hit people. All the little differences in hips, I never knew about it. I never got it. I never understood the mentality class that Duchess Elena teaches. And maybe I'm a weirdo that way, but kind of a guy with long hair. I mean, Manfred handed me a sword. He thought that I'm gonna hit her a couple of times and she's gonna run away. I was like, oh, cool. How do I hit back harder? So it is the Russian in me, perhaps.
Well, I mean, your technique has always been really solid, right? And your technique has always been very much good core, good linking your hips through your core to your shoulders to your sword. And I think you have a very classic SCA technique, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I've always seen that in you. Yeah.
That's it. I just have bigger hips. Big deal. Smaller wrists. So I, guard the wrists and work around the hips. Armor doesn't look as nice. But dresses do.
I've had this conversation with Seichel before, and I've had this similar conversation with other knights that are women, and the opinions vary greatly across the board, whether or not people believe that women have different mechanics and whether our traditional teaching methods work. And I think it's something that we simply need to keep an open mind to, and we need to listen to the up and coming women fighters about difficulties they're having and not simply assume that they are having an issue because they can't generate power or they're not learning the lessons that you teach everybody else and they get. We need to keep an open mind that if a particular person is having difficulty, whether it's because they're female, they're using their hips more or their shoulders more, we have to be very conscious to listen to them and try to figure out what works for that person. And this all stems from a history of, we're 50 some odd years now with two women fighters, two women chivalry. I think there's something that we're missing in the training and the mechanics. That's my perspective.
I'd like
I
to,
think it's a cultural thing.
we should
I think
bring
it's
up,
more than culture. I think there's training involved.
we should bring up Kit's question now because it's very relevant.
Wait, say that again, Thorson.
Kit- Kit's question, Kit has a question that is very relevant to this. She
Down at the
says-
bottom.
She says, I find some people like making being a female fighter a big part of the conversations when I'm trying to learn. I do not find this at all useful. What is the best way to steer away from this and focus on fighting and not the idea that I am somehow fundamentally different? It's the opposite of help. She directed that specifically to Seichel.
Yes. And she also texted me as well. And treat them equally. Don't treat them like they're handicapped. Simple. You want to be equal, then be equal. It's just that simple.
I think it comes down to being vocal. I mean, tell them, treat me the way you treat everybody else, teach me the way you teach everybody else, if that's what you were more comfortable with.
Yep,
Never be afraid to speak up, ever.
I agree.
All right. Well, thank you for humoring me, you two. Let's see what we got here.
I'm sorry, but I can't let it go.
Oh, what did I
Let it go.
My bad, that's me.
You can say that it's simple and treat them like you would everybody else. It's the opposite of help. That is not true for a substantial number of women who have come into this game. It's just not true. You cannot tell me that in 50 years of East Kingdom, there are only 2 women who have felt that they've been treated fairly and equally and been able to get through that bar and get to the chivalry. There is more to this than simplifying it to, hey, just do it. If it was just, hey, just do it, there'd be more women knights, and there aren't. So there is something that we're doing wrong in our recruiting, our retention, and our training. And you can disagree with that because you are physically capable of doing what you need to do and you want to focus on your mechanics, but not every woman fighter falls into that group. And for the people that don't, we need to make some changes and do more for them because they shouldn't get left behind.
Of course, we should individualize to each person. We absolutely should. However, ultimately, those who want to stick with it will get it. Most people look at me like I'm an alien.
Well,
I mean, to be fair, you can't standardize too much like that because, I mean, you look, even the men are the same way in that you have tall guys, big guys, thin guys, fat guys, weak guys, strong guys, whatever. The same goes for the women. It's just, all people who identify as female are built differently, shaped differently, etc. So we have to be able to adjust our game, I guess, when it comes from a mechanics standpoint, not necessarily just hit harder, because some people can't unless they push off their back foot a little harder or put their hips into it a little more.
Of course.
I think we just have to work on variety. Variety, is that the right word? I don't think variety is the right word I'm looking for.
we need to stop looking at women fighters and just assume that they can't hit hard enough or they're not doing enough. We need to stop and really particularize, look at the individual, look at what they're doing and see how we can improve their individual mechanics. And I don't know what the necessary answer is for each person, but I do know that we've had a very long history of saying, well, you just gotta, and it's not always that easy. We have to take steps. There's this old adage, there are no bad students, there are only bad teachers. So we have to kind of figure out what we can do differently to help improve a lot of people who are simply just getting pushed by the wayside, frankly.
Oh,
So-
Jabril, I agree with what you're saying about paying attention to the individual. Yeah, I think it's critical as a coach that I teach fundamentals that I found to be sound for a variety of body types and psychological types and so on, but that I also, whenever I'm working with somebody, I look at what is and is not working for this individual right now. If this person right now has an issue with being afraid to really hit somebody, or this person is trying to use good mechanics but still having problems generating power, or whatever the issue seems to be, I need to look at that and figure out how to adapt training and possibly adapt techniques for this person. So to me, that is useful. And just as you said, making blanket assumptions about categories of trainees based on gender or anything else is not. You really have to, just like when you fight, you have to perform it optimally. You have to be able to see what the fighter in front of you is really doing right now. Not even what that same fighter did last week or even yesterday. What is this person doing now? How are they reacting to what I do? And by the same token, whether I'm working with someone on the pal or teaching footwork or whatever, I need to be able to perceive what is and isn't working for this person right now and go from there.
All right. All right. Let's see. Where's that?
Guys, I'm going to be back in just a couple minutes.
All right. Looks like Anton jumped on. What's up, buddy?
Hey guys, sorry for the tardiness, but
Okay.
the wife does come first.
Actually, well, I'm going to go through a couple more, but there is something I like to circle around about with Anton. That the question we had earlier about the differences between kingdoms. So, but I want to see if we can get through some of this list here. Would you be interested in an all Shiv tourney, but not just a Shiv tourney, an inter-kingdom Shiv tourney, kind of like a known world or best of the best type of tourney?
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah, sure.
I like to fight.
I tell you,
Yeah, I'd like to remember my armor.
it will be one long ass tourney, but
Oh, Roman melee.
I mean,
Several
you see
days.
those you see those all the time at Interkingdom Wars, anyways, right? Like, I mean, the Outland's Prize tourney, and you've got the Rose Cancer tourney, the Valkyrie Rose tourney at Great Western is a good one, and those aren't even necessarily only Shiv, but I mean, they end up being your best of the best. I mean, I've watched Hans and Uther in finals there, like a couple of incredible matchups, and your top your top four are always awesome.
all right. So this next question is going to hurt a little. So it looks like a couple-parter. It says, "What do you think the people of the East think about the chivalry? Where do you think they are wrong? And how do you think, or excuse me, how can you try to change perceptions?" And I am not touching this one.
Nope.
Anyone?
Not touching it. Nope.
So
we actually did a poll about this.
Uh-huh.
Like 2 years ago. I might even still have it up, but it was interesting because by region, the Canadians love the Shiv. The northern and central and southern seem fairly to have fairly the similar attitudes, where it is very, very apparent that they have had some bad interactions. The common words that were most associated with chivalry, I think, were thugs. But at the same time, and I found it, I'm bringing it up. But at the same time, it was probably a 60-40 split, where the 60% had some sort of bad interaction that stuck in their maw and they were not happy. But the 40% were all like ecstatic and loving and whatever. So the views were actually either extremely positive or extremely negative. And most of the people attribute that to whether they met one of the chivalry first or Willie.
Wow.
That was a setup, man.
Alley-oop.
No, but no. So in all sincerity, whoever asked that, shoot me it was probably Larissa, but shoot me an IM and I will share that information with you.
I will address something that I think that people often get wrong about the chivalry, and that is that there's an idea about the chivalry that we are only interested in the stick and in hitting people with stick, and we are basically just a testosterone fueled fight club. And I don't believe that to be true on the whole. I think that that's true for some members of the chivalry, but I think that most members of the chivalry take the ideal of chivalry very seriously, take their place in the kingdom seriously, and take the arts and sciences and service seriously. More seriously than I think a lot of people think.
I think that's,
and I think that, and the other thing is how to change that. And I advise this to the chivalry all the time. Is take a local office where you have to interact positively with non-fighters. I know the local office I've taken most often is Marshall. I don't have to interact with non-fighters a lot, but I still have to interact with non-fighters as a local officer, right? I've also been a local herald, and same reason.
So I think the one thing I wanted to add to that is, I think in my opinion, it seems like a lot of times people will mistake passion for either aggression or I don't want to say ignorance, but for instance, a lot of the times if I'm trying to, especially if we're doing, I love Melee. Melee's my jam. When I start talking about it and going over stuff, I get passionate, I get loud, I get, hey, you go there, you do this. It's absolutely nothing against anybody. It's just a passion that comes out. Can you do me a favor? And my voice goes up a little. I get a little louder. I get a little more animated.
We're hearing
When I'm trying to teach somebody something, I will start to get that same way. I was working with a fencing group the other day, or a couple months ago now. It seems like the other day. I don't know what happened. And I was trying to go over some small unit tactics. And as we're getting a little more into it, I'm getting all excited because I love Melee. No, you guys come here. No, you go over here. No, you guys, no, go around this way. And somebody called me later or told me later, like, hey, you were getting a little pushy there. I'm like, it's just a passion. I'm passionate. I want to make every fighter, every person in this kingdom better to represent the kingdom. So I think that might be not wrong, but I think that might be a misperception. Sometimes people will mistake a passion for aggression or something like that. And if it sounds like an excuse, well, that's my excuse. So
I think perhaps, Wilhelm, you're correct in that fighting is our main art. It is what we do. I love to sew, I love to draw, but I do not get as excited about a stitch or, texture of paint as I do about, oh my God, look what we just did. Whether individual and it is passion. It is. Fighting is our art.
I've also found that I'm not going to answer what people think. I don't think it's up to me to say, but I think that there's arrogance that people sometimes see in the chivalry. And my personal take on it, there's a lot of socially awkward fighters. A lot of socially awkward fighters who are just not good at communicating. And I think it sometimes looks like arrogance, and it's really just somebody's nervous. And it's hard to see a person who goes out in armor hitting other people with a stick as being nervous or socially awkward. But I frankly think it's more the norm than the exception amongst a lot of the fighters. So, I don't know how that gets changed. I don't know that it's the right perception, but I do think a lot of our social awkwardness is perceived incorrectly.
And I want to make one last point on this, where it says, how can you try to change the perceptions? I don't know that it's entirely our responsibility to try to change perceptions. I think it's more of people need to just come up and ask and talk. People get the impressions of, or how can I say it? People get perceptions of what they think we're acting like or how they think we are. If you're not sure, come and ask. Come and talk to us. I mean, I try to make myself ridiculously accessible doing things like this. This is the exact reason why I wanted to do something like this. So people can come onto a public forum, ask any bloody thing they want, and feel comfortable sitting in their own living room, do it. If you heard something that somebody did, or 10 years ago, I heard, you guys used to do this and that was kind of weird. Give us we have to communicate these things. There's nothing we can do. And I say we, I shouldn't speak for the order, but there's nothing I can do to change perceptions if I don't know what your perception is. Talk to us. We're not, well, Thorsten smells a little, but other than that, it's not that bad. Any one of us you can come up to and just ask your questions. So.
It's true. The rose smell does actually overpower people. I apologize. But I think Ozer brings up a good point about presenting ourselves a little bit more openly. Yes, Wilhelm is ridiculously out there, but I think that there are other ways to do it a little subtler. Um, volunteering at events, serving feast, running troll, as Val said, holding a local office that doesn't deal with just fighters. These are all things that I think a lot of the Chiv do, but it's certainly something we should and could do more of. Just throwing that out.
Yeah, in line with both with what Thorson just said and with what Jabril is talking about. Yeah, and I think that for sure we can self-assess and see where we can present ourselves in a way that makes it easier for people to feel like they can engage with us. Obviously, I often don't talk that much, and sometimes I can look aloof or even hostile when I'm really just thinking about something or just can't think of anything to say. And so that's something that I've consciously worked on, trying to make more of an effort to go say hi to new people, smile more, try to look, not just look, but actually be more welcoming. So I do think it's something that we should work on.
One of the things that I think is really good for all of us, as I'm looking around the members of Chivalry in this group, is the fact that there are a lot of us here with diverse interests beyond fighting. So just making ourselves a little bit more visual, whether it's with the combat archery, yeah, I know that's still fighting, but it's still another group. Whether it's with thrown weapons or archery or arts, just being a little more visible, doing those things that don't involve having a stick in our hand is huge to try and show that we are more than one-dimensional.
Well, I think part of chivalry is humility, and I never like saying, hey, I did that, or I sewed that, or I painted that, or I served over there. It's like, you just do. I don't want to talk about it. It's part of what we are. It's embarrassing to just say, I did stuff. You just do it because you have to and you want to.
So I think part of this also, as someone who's not a peer, is you're intimidated. So reaching out to the newer people or the people who are going to be scared to approach you because you're important may be part of it as well. And I know that's hard for everyone, but.
No, and that's totally a valid thing. I hear that all the time, that newer people, this and that, they see, Sir so-and-so or Master or Duke or Laurel, whatever. And that's why I try to push, hey, we're all just peeps. Come and talk to us. We're all in the same thing that we love. But I totally get it. I don't know how to reduce the appearance of unapproachability, if that makes any sense.
It's harder for some than others. I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of people here. I know that I was considered pretty intimidating before I was belted, so.
Yeah, but you're snuggly. It's okay.
That's it. I'm wearing a service animal tag.
All right, let's see. Kit wrote me a paragraph here. Let me see if I can. Let's see. My husband recently drove a route I routinely do for practices, which is 4.5 hours one way. He remarked that he had not realized just how demanding a drive it was. I have had a really hard time getting across to him how demanding the whole thing is and how much it means. I find it can be taxing in a relationship. How do you balance this? I am especially interested in those that had to travel to events and did not have more than one practice within a 2-hour drive a week. I just want to add one little caveat. Kid, is your husband in the SCA? I don't know if I've ever met your husband, because that is a whole nother dynamic.
I'll address the non-SCA spouse afterwards.
You
don't want to
All
monopolize.
right, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. He is, but more locally and more involved with like cooking and like forestry stuff, like that kind of thing, not the fighting.
Okay. Does anybody want to jump? I mean, for me, with the exception of practices, I mean, Vienna went to all the same events and stuff like that. So I don't, I'm not much of a litmus test for this. So does anyone else have anything they want?
I'll go.
Good.
It's hard. My husband does not really play in the SCA. He does not have a big interest in becoming a part of the SCA. He does like Penzik, oddly enough. And now we have a 5-year-old, which also takes up a great deal of time. I would never have been able to balance raising a child and going through the path to chivalry.
We're doing better. We're doing better in that one.
On my own, it's hard. What I do to try to balance that out is we have a night or two of the week that's just our time. You know, we'll have, for the family, we'll have family movie night, or we'll do specific stuff, or we'll have date night, and try to like isolate time for the spouse. But it's a tough conversation that you have to get agreement on. You know, you pick the events that are important, you pick the practices that you know you need to get to, and you know you balance your time as much as possible. But as far as maintaining the relationship, I think it's just important to free up specific time to dedicate to your partner so that they get the same attention that you give to the game. But yeah, I mean, it's an obstacle. It's a huge obstacle, and it's not one easily overcome.
Anyone else? Mo, you live in the tundra. How's it for you traveling to practices and events and so when they're 22 hours apart?
If traveling is mean to go to Montreal first, it takes me 3 hours to go there, and then I travel. So it's always long. It's 8 hours and over, except maybe when I visit Kit, Coldwood, like 4.5, 5.
Not bad.
but it's a great time anyway, because you have to spend a lot of times with your man-at-arms, your squires, discussing about fightings, about what do you do in the SCA to get better, to what do you do to improve, what do you like, don't like, what music you listen, no, don't play that, and it's really fun.
All right. Anyone else have anything they want to add to that at all? Like I said, I have no insight because luckily I've had it pretty lucky the last little while. I can't complain at all.
Yeah, I don't have any insight.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. I'm more skilled in melee, including battlefield command and strategy, than in tourney. In the question of prowess, are tourney and melee held in equal measure? Is one held higher than the other in consideration? Oh boy. That has been an argument in the East Kingdom for as long as I can remember. The base I'll let other people talk about it, but the basic two sides are the East Kingdom is a melee kingdom. You know, all we do is practice all year for, you know, the handful of battles at Penzik. And then the other side of that is, yes, but it's easy to hide in melee and nobody gets to see your individual skills and how they do an attorney. So go.
In a real politics sense, tourney is much more important than melee. And I don't say that's the way that it should be. I'm saying that's the way that it is. Because most of the chivalry are primarily tourney fighters. And as we already said earlier, it's much easier to stand out in a tournament than it is in a melee.
I'm not saying it's right, but it's true.
Yeah, I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying that's true.
That's 100% true.
Yeah.
May I add to that if you are in a melee and you are terrible, you're going to be terrible in singles and vice versa. So
not true at all.
No, I would disagree.
Tell it to Arn.
I'll use Stefan.
Arn's one of the worst melee fighters on the planet.
Stefan was one of the worst melee fighters.
No, Stefan's great. Stefan's great at folding up a shield wall. He's one of the best at that.
Anybody in singles, but on melee, the worst.
You
God,
still
Stefan's
have
like a
his
javelin
early
gun. You let
years-
him go on a shield wall and it's gone.
No, in his early years, he was not great against melee, but he has gotten significantly.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But before he was knighted,
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is true.
I will.
Who's that?
I feel like I'm talking too much, but I just want to say that Duke Gregor had said something once that really makes sense to me. It's much easier to see a person's skill in tournament than it is in melee. It's not that one, I don't think it's one is necessarily valued more than the other. It's for everybody. Some people absolutely do value tourney more than melee, but it's a lot easier to see someone as a good tournament fighter because you place in a tournament against your contemporaries or against other Shiv. You can see how this person did and how their skill has developed over time. In melee, you may get a victory because somebody, you had a good team that day, or you had a good strategy. It's hard to say that this person's polearm was so outstanding on the field on that particular day that they stand out for their skill. I mean, there are some people where that is just there are some people who are so extraordinary that it rises to the top and it becomes crystal clear because it happens over and over and over and over again. But for the most part, it really has a lot more to do with visibility, I think, than one saying this is just valued more outright.
Now, I want to add to that and say, Anton, how does that weigh against with other kingdoms that maybe aren't so melee centric?
I mean, so the question itself right away, right? You're couching that in like the value it has, when the chivalry is looking at a fighter, right? Not just the value it has to a person or a kingdom, right? So what Jabril said, absolutely accurate, right? If you're fighting in tourney, I see you fighting. I know exactly what you're doing because I'm watching you fight. If you place well, I know you did well, right? In melee, I can see how you're working with the people around you. I think they both measure different skill sets, right? And if I'm looking at someone as a chivalry candidate, there are things that I want to see them possess from both of those skill sets, and they don't need to be an expert in both, right? But I would generally hope that the guy who is a great tourney fighter has at least the basic rudiments of being able to provide some direction to the guys around him in a melee, right? If I want to look at him as a chivalry candidate, he doesn't need to be a melee genius, but the fact that he can then take a peer-like role in that melee with the people around him is important. And when you look at other kingdoms, right? So to move over to that side of it. There are a lot of kingdoms where there's just no such thing as a war knight, right? Like war knights just don't get made in some kingdoms. They don't exist because there's some kingdoms where it's just not as big a deal. Like so the West, for example, was very tourney heavy, and their culture has changed a lot, even since I first started going there. And I mean, I haven't been around a super long time, right? I mean, in the last 6-7 years, going to Great Western War and fighting in melees there, the difference in cohesion in their units is night and day, right? It's a completely different world. And it's interesting to see that as the kingdom as a whole has gotten a bit more focus on war, the discussion about candidates has taken a little bit more value in how they do in war because there's been more focus on it. So any kingdom that focuses on one thing more than the other is obviously going to value that one thing over the other. I think the East puts more focus than most on melee fighting, but like I said, for me, there's different skill sets represented. So I would hope that you have a little bit of each, depending on what your strengths are.
I saw Ozier jumped in with he didn't agree, buddy. You got mic on? You want to add something to that? Ozier? Nope.
Am I here?
There you are, buddy.
Hello?
Yep.
Hey, about the melee and the...
Yep. Yeah, you said you disagreed 100%, so I'd like to hear your argument or your thoughts.
Oh, sorry. I was also just walking around for the last 5 minutes. So I don't know if anyone had anything in addition to it that I don't want to run over. But I think that the thing I disagreed with 100% was that you don't that like if you're good in one, you have to be good in the other, I think was a statement that I disagreed with off the bat. And I think that a lot of people chimed in with a couple of examples of people that we know are much better in one than the other. And while I do believe that prowess is prowess and it can translate, but like to say that if you're a good fighter, you got to be a good fighter in this other thing, like I definitely don't think breaks down, because like sometimes people's focus is different and they're like the way that they analyze things is either more specific or more general. So like we could both be good fighters, but like if I'm better at analyzing the way that the group moves rather than the way that the individual moves in it, like you're going to want me in your melee line, because I can not only see the person like across from me, but I can see how things are forming and how they're going past that. If like Arn is like a great analyst of an individual fighter's like specific capabilities and what they do, like I have never seen someone break down like a one-on-one fight with him like any better, you know? So like, I don't know, I feel like I've gotten to the point of rambling, because I'm not gonna lie, I did stop paying attention for a second while I was like cleaning up in the background. Just trying to jump back in and give some points, but I don't agree with it. Sorry. Yeah, sorry. I wish I'd had the mic on the second that it happened, but I'm throwing behind right now.
Anyone else have anything they just want to add real quick, or we'll move on?
Yeah, a couple of things. I think once you've developed a solid skill set, then competition either in singles or melee becomes in large part a mental test. Can you handle the psychological pressure? And to that point, there are different kinds of psychological pressure in melee and in singles. On the one hand, in melee, you have the added pressure of not wanting to let down the team. Even if you don't have a burning ambition to be the MVP, you don't want to be the guy that screwed up and caused your team to lose. Whereas in singles, you have the pressure of, okay, it's just you and this other opponent. There is nobody to help you. There's not teammates that you're going to set stuff up for. It's just you. And so those are there's a distinction there, and certainly I think that singles prowess is important because it's a different kind of test than melee. Although I personally like to see a candidate have a good level of skill in both. And just to follow up on that real quickly, I'll say that, yeah, sometimes somebody is going to have a much harder time getting good at melee than in singles, or a much harder time getting good at singles than in melee. But I think that anybody that has done the work to achieve a chivalry level of skill in singles can, if they're motivated enough and if they keep working at it, also achieve a chiv level of skill in melee, and vice versa. Like I say, it may take someone much longer to get to that level in melee than it did in singles, or vice versa. But I think that anybody that has the motivation to do the work to excel in one area can get to that level in the other as well if they want it bad enough.
All right. So let's see. Next question is actually kind of humorous on a personal note. It says, "How often does the shiv converse?" You're looking at it, but compared to some of the other orders and stuff like that, with message boards and message lists and email boards, Facebook pages, we talk at events. Really do. That's where we do the primary of our talking. And he has an example, or they have an example here. It says, "Working with certain shiv, I was advised to try something and see if it works for me. That means as I'm trying something new, I won't be good at it right off the bat. Outside observers had judged me on things that are new."
Coming.
Huh? Oh.
Yeah, they just answered my question.
Oh, all right.
Oops. Willie, keep going. That was good.
Oh, all right, fair enough.
Enjoying it. It was like watching a show.
Yeah.
Let's see. I lost my. See, now you
Like-
got my train.
You're like the morning drive time DJ.
Hey, welcome everybody to 95.5, the hat. Let's see. So I guess the last part is it makes me concerned about trying new things. Is there a process? Because I usually hear negative critique second or third hand, and usually months later. And that's Trentus. So process, I mean, I don't know. I don't think there's any specific. If someone asks, offers you advice to try something different or try something new, I mean, it's just practice it. It'll either work or it won't work.
Here's the thing. The shiv are really opinionated.
No.
And
No. I disagree.
And we often don't agree on really basic things like how to throw a snap, right? And so you are going to run into, and it's unfortunate, but it's true, and you have to keep it in mind, and I always try to keep it in mind. You're gonna run into chivalry who look at what you have been told to do by another knight, and their knee-jerk reaction will be, don't do that, right? That does a real disservice to the unbelted fighter. But I have seen it happen again and again and again. And I've had to stop myself from doing it too. And I think that's what you're talking about.
Can I step in off that?
Sure.
So one of the things that I think we need to do is accept that maybe the way that we teach a thing isn't going to work for everyone, which I think is kind of one of the things that Val is going off of, is saying that, like, I might throw that snap differently and there's 10 knights are going to tell you to throw it differently either. One of the things that I try to push is if somebody's like super down for a style or something, I say it might not be the way that I work, but I guarantee you there's someone that has a belt out there somewhere that probably fights similar to this. I can try to facilitate finding someone that can get this to work for you. Even if I don't know how to fight like that, it doesn't work for me. I can suggest to you and say, this might not be the best, but if it's something that you're passionate, you want, like, and you want to fight this style, like, I guarantee you, like, I don't fight with my arm behind my head, but I've felt like you fight me that way all the time, and I'm not going to tell you that's wrong. You know what I mean? Like, it's a style
I seem to do okay with it.
To use. So just because I can't do it doesn't mean that I'm right and I'm gospel against how you should fight against it. And I think we can also use that to relate to, a lot of times we just go up and give people advice, whether they've asked for it or not. And when you go up to somebody that hasn't asked you for advice and tell them they're wrong about something, it can put them in a state to not want to learn from you. So I think one of the things that we have to do, and all of the peerages kind of have to do, is when you're giving advice to people, just kind of ask. Go up, be like, hey man, I noticed you were fighting so-and-so. Are you looking for critiques on your fights? Because I can be like, your guard is wide open, and you could have been like, well, actually, I'm working on letting my opponent throw 3 shots before I return. So that's why it looks like I'm doing something weird and being passive or this, that, and the other thing. But people might just observe that and go, I've got to go up there and I've got to tell them they're doing something wrong. So I think we need to take it on ourselves and kind of like realize that there's different ways to do things, and that we need to sometimes bridge the communications differently on how to educate people if we think they're doing something wrong.
May I comment, since there's my question?
Absolutely.
Okay, so ulcers on the nose, but in my case, and it's happened a couple of times, my knight is actually in Nova Scotia. And there are times when someone will see me do something that someone has advised me. Anton gave me some great advice, and I was trying some things that were new last Falling Leaves. But of course, I was trying at another event after I talked to Anton, and Anton wasn't there. And then a month after that, my knight talked to me about something someone told him that I should, stick to what I know or whatever. And that's happened quite often, where basically I'm trying to, I want to do new things. I want to actually accept criticism and actually try to work on something else to get better. But in that process, it's going to be a little slower. And then it's like, oh, he's not that great. He's doing this, he's doing that. And it's like, if people did what Ozo said and just came up to me and asked me the question, I'd be receptive. I'm not intimidated by someone critiquing me, but come up and critique me. I'm wondering why am I hearing about these things 3 months, 2 months later? It doesn't make sense to me.
Well, I
Can I-
know. Go
Let
ahead.
me jump in real quick there. Trent, I will tell you, hands down, the most liberating time in armor I think I may have ever felt was the very first practice that I attended after being knighted. Because I got to walk out into that practice field wearing a white belt, and I picked up a sword and shield in a foreign land where almost no one at the practice knew me, and I sucked. I was terrible because it's me with a sword and shield, but I got to go out there and practice. And a lot of people were like, "You're a knight, man. I don't know about this guy. Well, I guess maybe they'll knight anyone there." And I mean, I didn't have to care, and it was amazing. And then I got to pick up a glaive later and surprise the hell out of them, which was kind of fun, I'll admit, right? You need to come to terms with the fact that some people are going to think maybe you suck because you're trying to practice a thing, right? Right before I got offered, I remember turning to Cullen and saying, I was like, hey, I'm going to try and not pick up my glaive as much, and I'm going to start trying to pick up a sword and shield more because I feel like that's what I need to do next to start moving forward. You know, I said, I'm going to let you know, because if someone tells you that they saw your guy and he looked terrible, well, that's going to be why it is, right? There's a certain amount of, you just need to understand that when you're looking towards the order, right? Like you're looking to have other people agree that you have hit a certain level of prowess. And that doesn't mean that they're right or wrong. It means that their opinion is what matters to them. You need to take care of yourself. And if that means 2 or 3 nights you're going to think you look terrible for 6 months while you start working on something else, you realize that you're fighting glaive and you're really, really strong on one-handed side only, and you haven't swapped hands enough, and you start fighting the next 6 months with the opposite hand lead and get your butt whooped a bunch. You know what, man? If anyone asks you, like, hey, so what about this? You say, oh, I'm trying to learn how to be ambidextrous. If they don't bother asking you, it's not your fault, dude. And you know what? Someone's going to figure that out eventually when they all come together and start talking about it.
Now, that's one thing I just want to add on real quick. Trent said that he may find out about something, weeks or months later or whatever. I know that me personally, I try to be conscious of the fact that sometimes my opinion carries weight with fighters, in that instead of walking up to Trent, he's having a bad day or something, instead of walking up and going, Trent, man, what the hell's going on? You look like crap today. Which, what if he was trying really hard and just had an off day or whatever? That could affect him mentally, as opposed to me going up to his knight the next time I see him, say, hey, I was watching Trent. Is he working on something new? He was looking a little rough. And then he'll tell me. And then he'll relay that to Trent. That's kind of my habit, because I don't want to embarrass or cause doubt on that fighter. Maybe they're having a bad day. Maybe they hurt their ankle the other day or something. I don't know if that makes sense, but I do that specifically because I don't want to call out that fighter who's probably very self-conscious if they're aware they're having a bad day. I mean, does that make sense?
Can I just add? I think you should always be very cautious about taking advice from a member of the peerage that starts with, I think you're doing this wrong. There is no one way to do anything. There is what is right for you. And you have to try different things. You have to do different things. You have to see what works for your mechanics. And there is a certain amount of awareness and reflection that you have to have in terms of wanting to not offend someone or not look like crap when you're fighting. But you're here to practice and you're here to learn. And if someone's telling you you're doing it wrong, you have to do it this way, they haven't mastered their own art. Because one of the parts of mastering our art is understanding that there is no one way and that you're always learning. And maybe the thing that you're doing that they're telling you is wrong might work better for them, and they need to try that and try to understand what it is you're doing. You're on a journey, you're on a path, and it's an individual path. People walk with you. They don't walk for you. And if you find that there is something that you want to practice and develop and make your own, then you damn well do it. And you make it work. Because if you think it's worth investing your time to practice, then invest your time in practice and see if you can develop it. And if you can't, then you move on to something else. But don't let someone tell you that you're doing something wrong. They can tell you that you're doing something that might hurt you. They can tell you that you're doing something that's high risk because of X, Y, or Z. But then they're giving you information that you can work with and build in one direction or another. But telling you you're doing something wrong, you have to do it this way, that's not being a good teacher. So take that information for what it's worth. One of the best pieces of advice I got from my knight is listen to what everybody says and discard what you don't need.
All right.
Something.
Good.
Something I was going to say from a little bit of a different perspective, back to the original question from Trent. At our practice, we have a lot of people who love to teach, and we got into a situation where someone was teaching one way, and then immediately that same practice, someone would come out and go, oh no, you're doing it wrong, try it this way. And then immediately there would be a third person coming out and giving their opinion. So we're trying. It's still a work in progress for us at our practice up here, but we're trying to make sure that we're asking for consent before we critique. And so that's just something that, to throw it back to Trent's original question, maybe we should all kind of think about that. It's something I know that's been mentioned before, but maybe try to, before you go up and criticize someone or critique someone, ask them if it's okay. Ask them, for consent.
All right. Did I miss one? I just scrolled through the list. It looks like there was just a lot of conversation going on. So if I did miss a question, just let me know and I'll go back to it.
Got one down at the bottom, Will.
Yeah, that's where I'm going right down now.
Okay.
What does an unbelt do when they're, wait a minute, let me unhighlight, there it goes. On this subject, what does an unbelt do when they're told they need to show more sword and shield when that's, when that style is difficult due to an injury? In all reality, I tell my squires and man-at-arms that if someone offers them or makes a definitive statement, like you need to do, or like Jabril said, you're doing that wrong or something like that, I tell them, smile and nod, be respectful, and then come talk to me or ignore it. Because like Jabril said, there's no definitives when someone, I'm trying to think how to articulate this, it's not very well, but if this, all right, someone else take over because I lost my train of thought again.
I think that with what Jabril said in the previous statement is accurate here too, right?
Yeah.
That if there's a reason, and it doesn't even have to be that it's an injury, it can just be you just don't like sword and shield,
yeah.
Right?
I can't comprehend that, but I get it.
There's absolutely no reason that sword and shield has to be your path, right? We have fighters here today whose path did not involve the sword and shield, really, right? And so I think it's an odd statement, right? I'm a sword and shield fighter primarily. I do a lot of other stuff, but that's my primary style, and that's what I can teach, right? And so that's the thing that I think I teach the best. But if somebody comes up to you and says, "Oh, you need to do sword and shield," and like I said, that was what somebody said to me, and it worked for me, right? Consider if it's going to work for you, but if it's not going to work for you, then don't do it.
Can I tag in?
Anyone else? Ozier, good. Is that you, buddy?
I'll just reiterate what I kind of said in the chat. But basically, I think that I'm not going to fight a form that is going to be injured, like it's going to hurt me. And will the same person have come up to a sword and shield fighter and been like, "Hey, man, you got to fight polearm. I don't care if you don't have good gauntlets. You got to fight polearm." Like, because to me, it's a similar thing. It's like if the guy's not going to come up to the polearm fighter and say, "Why aren't you fighting sword and shield?" Are they going up to every other fighter and asking them why they're fighting the form that they're fighting? I think what might be happening is in their head, they're seeing, if you want people to notice you, you've got to do better in tournament. And if you notice tournament, sword and shield is what reigns in tournament. And so in their head, they're translating, if you fight sword and shield, you might have better tournament appearances. So therefore, you should fight sword and shield. But I don't think that that's valid. And I would never fight a form that's going to hurt me. Like, and that's for me, who's gotten hit by cars and been out of fighting, probably for injury as long as I have been fighting, and like take the time, heal back. And like, if I'm not comfortable fighting a form, I'm not going to fight it. And I don't know, that my rant over.
I don't think, Ozer, that it's even that. I think they're saying you've got to fight like me. That's what they're saying.
True. Also, I think I'm just dissecting it a step further. Like, you've got to fight like me. I fight like this well. If I fight with this, I'm going to do well in tournament. So you should fight like me. And 9 out of 10 times, the polearm fighter doesn't make it to the finals of the tournament unless it's 2 of 4. We have 4 or 5 polearm fighters that we'll see high in most every tournament. And so 90% of the tournament fighters are sword and shield fighters. And when we see that these people are good, they're the people that are winning. I don't think that it's a in his statement of you need to fight more sword and shield, even though it's something that is prevented by an injury, I don't think it's a huge jump to think that the person is insinuating that sword and shield is going to get you more W's. More W's get you more noticed. The more noticed you are, the better off you are. So that's just my take on it, but I totally definitely see your side of it too, Val, saying like that's what they fight, so why would they tell you to fight anything else?
But let's not forget the fundamental reason of why we're here in this game. Is to have a good time.
Have fun.
And right. And unless you're into that shit, why would you hurt yourself to have fun?
1000%.
Like if fighting a particular weapons form is uncomfortable, don't do it. You don't need to impress anyone that badly that when you leave the game and you go back to your mundane life, you can't do the things that you need to do in real life. This is supposed to be fun.
So this looks like someone, Fergus added onto that he says, I've seen households and teachers say that new fighters need to fight sword and shield for X number of years before branching out, regardless of how much they dislike it. That I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine somebody saying that, because that is just inherently wrong in my book.
Yeah,
I know the specific case he's talking about. I know the people that chose not to fight sword and shield there. They're polearm fighters. Some of them are knighted. I know other people that decided not to follow those rules and just hang out with those people and don't go by that. And also, I know that they've let other people go into other weapons forms more recent years, but I do understand the base of what you're saying, and I think it's a bad base. I can understand them from a point of saying, like, logistically speaking, sword and shield fighter, it's a good way to get hit for the first time. Like, a polearm fighter has to do a lot more work. They're going to get hurt a lot of times. Like, you got to have good gear. You got to have good gauntlets. So I can definitely see someone being like, sword and shield is the easiest thing we can outfit you with. It is the thing that is going to make you most comfortable with getting hit most quickly. But to say you have to fight it for X amount of years, like, I don't think that you should make a set thing because, like, we're all individuals, right? It's like, what if I come in here? I've been playing lacrosse for 15 years. You're going to tell me I'm not able to use a 6-foot stick well enough for you? Like, all right, so I think that it's a bad practice. I think that they're gimping their household and themselves for having a policy like that, and I think that it should be something that we should speak out against, just in general, because like I said, we're here to have fun, and it's something that can definitely constrict somebody's entry into the game, their continued practice in the game, and their fun, especially if it's in an area where that's the only thing that they might see, and then you think this is the option, this is what the SCA is what I have to do. So I think that across everything, man, we should just be more open and trying to just get people to have some fun doing the things that they do and just trying to make them as safe as they can doing it. So, like, Doug, you don't have gauntlets. You're not starting polearm. Sorry. Like, here's a sword and shield. We can hang out until you can. Like,
I approach it somewhat differently, right? If someone's going to be my student, then I'm going to teach them what I teach and what I do best. And so I tell them, look, if you're going to be my squire, then I'm going to teach you sword and shield, and that's what we're going to concentrate on. And you can branch out at some point, but that's what I teach. That's a little bit different than what you're saying, but I think that's a valid thing to say. Right?
I agree with you entirely. If you take on a student, that's what you want to teach them, then
right,
yeah.
Right, but that's not, everybody needs to be sword and shield, right? Which is not what I'm saying.
That's an agreement between you and the students being decided upon before they are officially taken on as a student, right?
Exactly, because if somebody wanted to be a glaive fighter, I would send them to you or to Cullen, right? I would say this is where you're going to learn the most.
I have a ton that can get unpacked about weapons forms, sword and shield versus great weapon, right? And we'll generalize to great weapon, not just glaive, even though that's obviously my favorite, right? I can say that the best backhanded compliment that I ever got was from a sitting king after we fought for a while. He was a sword and shield guy, he's a lefty, and I fought him with my glaive. And when we wrapped up, he said, "Man, you gave me a great set. I suspect if you were in my kingdom and you were fighting at that level, just based on prowess, you'd probably be where we would be now for knighting you, and that's awesome, And I was like, oh well, that's really cool. Thanks so much. And he said, and I really admire the fact that you fight with the glaive as your primary form because it's as you said, it's what you love, it's what brings you the most joy. He said because you're a lefty, and if you'd swapped a sword and shield, I'm sure you would have got knighted a couple of years ago. That hurt. So it hurt not only because oh, thanks so much, Your Majesty, that feels great, right? But because in a way it's accurate. The rules of our game, the way it's written, they tend to favor sword and shield. It's the predominant form, and that's cool. I fight what I fight because I love it, and it's what comes naturally. It's what I enjoy, and I've for me finding center grips as opposed to strap shields turned that around for me and made fighting with a sword and shield a lot more fun because it let me move more like I was moving with a glaive. But as far as you need to fight sword and shield, two different things I'm going to say here, right? Number one, you don't need to. You can do what you enjoy. That's it. I know that when I was really like hitting the point where I won a tourney, holy crap, and then I won another tourney, and like things started picking up, I realized where I was, the best thing for me to do was to pick up a sword and shield, because once I picked up that sword and shield, I started realizing from having to start doing a ton of pell work and throwing combos, I suddenly understood, oh, well, it's actually a lot easier with a sword and shield for me to throw this to this, which meant as a glaive guy, I knew what combos I was more likely to see on average across the board, right? Learning any form helps you beat it and helps you survive against it, which is super, super important. And I think personally, and I say this to other people who are starting with Great Weapon, right? Like I tell them flat out, like, hey, if that's what you enjoy, you should do it, right? It's going to be harder. You're going to get hit more. There's a lot more to learn to get to the point where you can competently fight with guys who are fighting with a sword and shield. And you're going to get your butt whooped a lot. But if this is what brings you joy and getting some extra butt whoopings is okay with you on the way, you should do that. That being said, I wish that I had picked up sword and shield a little earlier, because I am confident that learning more of those sword and shield basics would have helped my glaive fighting immeasurably if I had learned those things earlier. Right, and that means what I'm saying here isn't that you need to fight sword and shield, but that if along the way you work on your weapons depth as a whole, you will be a better fighter across the board in whatever form you choose to specialize in, if you do.
All right. It's getting a little late. Looks like we're out of questions. I do have one thing I want to swing around by again, because I would like to hear Anton's opinion on this. We had a question earlier about how the path to chivalry differs from kingdom to kingdom in different kingdoms. And I don't know many people who have traveled more than you personally. So I would like to hear your opinion on how the path to chivalry, yeah, that word, differs between the East and the other kingdoms and stuff like that. The question came out of, why does it take so long to get knighted in the East? That's where it came from.
Okay. I mean, that's a super direct question, right?
Yeah.
So taking off the kid gloves and being honest, right? I think that the East in general, right, and in recent years, I think it's equalized a little bit. The East in general sets a higher bar for prowess in the chivalry than most other kingdoms do, as a general statement. And in that's both good and bad, right? I know when I was coming up, I had often heard, knights saying, it's like, well, I mean, I'd like to say that, if you take the average newly made Eastern knight and throw him against a newly made knight from any other kingdom, that Eastern knight's probably going to win most of the time. And like, I feel that while we want to think that that's the case, it isn't, right? Because it all depends on the fighter at the end of the day. Every kingdom
says that.
Every single kingdom
believes that about their fighters.
Yeah. One of the things that I would say all the time, and having spent time in both kingdoms, I still say it regularly, right? If you take your rock solid middle of the road unbelt from the East and your rock solid middle of the road unbelt from the West, and you put them in a tourney one-on-one, I would expect the guy from the West to win most of the time. But if you clone those fighters and make 5 of them and make it a 5v5, I would expect the East to win most of the time. Right? It's cultural focuses. It's what you spend your time on. So the path to chivalry in different kingdoms absolutely varies based on kingdom. Having now gotten to sit circles or be involved in circle or just help measure up candidates in right now four kingdoms. It is entirely different in each one of them. Entirely different. There's a lot of similarities. But some places you have someone like me, and I mean, my question always is, hey, that's cool. Does he have an art? Does he do service? Some kingdoms don't talk about that nearly as much. Some kingdoms care more about warfighting. I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of similarities that you see, right? There's always those things that we all talk about where like Trent had said, like how do you train new things when everybody's watching you and you don't want to look like you suck? That happens in every kingdom. That absolutely happens in every kingdom. That's just part of the way it works. I think some kingdoms give a slightly warmer welcome to newer unbelts than others. I won't hesitate to say that, you know, like when Araya and I had won our first coronet, I feel like the East considered me to be, and I mean, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, like I was just out of that like FNG category and just starting to be someone who was going to start going somewhere. Whereas in the West, most of my peers there, you know, lowercase p peers, were knights or the unbelts who were just getting knighted or near getting knighted. There's just a different level of engagement. I feel like I was more well known in the West despite spending less time there. I feel like the chivalry and the upper end fighters generally made a better effort at being inclusive of all the fighters around them. They're also a much smaller kingdom, right? So there's so many different things to look
Alaska,
at.
but yeah.
Yeah, well, they're a much
Colin can
less
tell you about that.
populated kingdom, right?
Alaska
But
is kind of like counting Canada, and who does that, right, Mo?
Yeah.
But you're going to see massive differences between kingdoms. The differences you see. I attended a Chiv meeting in one kingdom, and I was glad that I knew. But an abstention, if you abstained during vote in council, it was counted as a no. And here I am, a visiting Chiv who doesn't really know any of these people they're talking about except one person. I'm going to abstain on all of those when they're polling, right? That's just what I'm going to do. I'm not going to vote yes or no. I don't have enough data on these candidates. I can tell you what I saw today, and that's that. So when the voting started, I actually left council because I didn't want my votes to be counted as abstentions and thus counted as no's against these candidates that I didn't know. And if I didn't know that, I would have been anchoring votes, right? Like, there are so many differences, large and small, that like to generalize that, you know, is the path the same in different kingdoms? The path is the same. You're going to get out there and you're going to fight and you're going to do your best, and that's really all you're going to do, right? It's also totally different. Like there's just so many different variables that it's really kind of impossible to try and boil it down and say like, well, you know, like it's pretty much all the same or it's pretty much all different, because yeah, it's all the same and it's all completely different.
All right. I think that's probably going to do it. We all know waffles are superior, so I'm not worried about that question.
Play chess.
Did I miss any? Did anyone see any I'm not catching here? All right. Thank you, everyone. I want to thank all the members of the Chivalry that came out today to chat with everybody. Thank you, everyone, for joining us and asking your questions. I'm sure we'll be doing this again at some point. So spread it around. Let people know, hey, we're out here. We're not that big and scary like Thorson, and you know, or have weird accents like Mo, and you can understand us and ask us questions. And we're all big, friendly people.
Schmoopy.
What that?
Schmoopy.
Oh, you're where's that mute? So, all right, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Like I said, we'll do this again sometime. I'll make sure I post it up and spread the word if you guys had a good time, or let me know if it sucked. Thank you. All right, everybody.
Thanks.
Have a good
Bye,
night.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Bye, Jackie.
Oh, and I will post this up on YouTube after I edit it and cut out the lulls and stuff like that. So I'll post those links.
Excellent.
All right, good night, everyone.
Good night, all.
Good night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Good night, Joe. Ciao.